I thought it was just another envelope. You know the kind. Printed names, lifeless font, fake urgency stamped in red. I almost threw it away with the grocery ads and local pizza coupons. But something about the weight of it felt different, heavier. I sat at the kitchen table, sunlight cutting through the blinds in perfect little stripes. The silence was my companion these days. Daniel had called last week. 2 minutes, maybe less. Clara hadn't been by in months. I opened the envelope without thinking. And then my heart dropped. Final notice. Outstanding balance, $47,000. Account holder, Margaret W. Thorne. Loan agreement number 62972A. I read it once, then again. A loan? I hadn't taken out any loan, especially not one for nearly $50,000. I barely used my credit card. The last time I'd borrowed money, Ronald Reagan was in office, and I'd paid that back early. I looked at the date on the notice, 3 months ago. That's when the loan was issued, and there it was, my full name, my address, my last 4 Social Security digits, all of it. My hands trembled. I picked up the phone and called Daniel. He answered on the 3rd ring, voice chipper like he was in the middle of something far more interesting than me. "Hey, Ma, everything okay?" "Daniel, did you take out a loan in my name?" Silence. Not the kind that falls naturally, but the kind that cracks a conversation clean in two. "What are you talking about?" "I just got a letter." "Mom, listen, we talked about this." "Talked about what?" "A few months ago, I told you I was handling some stuff, and you offered to help. You said you could use my name if I needed to." "I never said that, Daniel." "You probably just forgot. It was late. You were tired. It's fine." I don't know what hurt more, the calm way he said it, or the fact that he sounded so sure. As if I was the one misremembering? As if my brain had betrayed me? After we hung up, I sat there for a long time staring at the letter. I read it again and again. I pressed my fingers to the signature line. The signature looked like mine, almost, but not quite. I'm 70 years old. I forget where I put my glasses sometimes. I call the cat by the wrong name. But this? A $47,000 loan? I'd remember, or wouldn't I? And yet the seed of doubt had been planted carefully, deliberately. I went to the sink and ran cold water over my wrists. It used to help when Ronald was alive. He'd say, "Cool your fire, Maggie. You're not crazy, you're just mad." But Ronald was gone. And suddenly, I wasn't sure if I was crazy or if someone was counting on me to believe I was. I didn't sleep that night. The letter sat on the kitchen counter like it was watching me. I made tea around it, ate toast beside it, folded laundry with one eye on it. My hands kept drifting to it like it might disappear or change its contents if I looked away. By morning, I called Clara. Unlike Daniel, she didn't pretend to be cheerful. "What's going on, Mom? It's early." "Did you or your brother put my name on a loan?" A pause, then a sigh that sounded more like irritation than concern. We've already talked about this. There it was again. No, Clara, we haven't. I just got a letter. $47,000 in my name. I never signed anything. You said you were helping Daniel with his business. I said no. I remember that. Another pause. Then her tone shifted. Gentle, patronizing. Mom, I think you're getting confused again. You've been forgetting things lately. You told me last month you left the stove on all night. That's not the same. That was one time. I'm just saying we're all under stress. Maybe you thought you said no, but you didn't. My throat tightened. Don't gaslight me, Clara. She laughed, but not kindly. No one's gaslighting you, but you've always had that stubborn streak. You forget things, then act like the rest of us are liars. This is different. Is it? Something in me cracked then. Not broken like glass. No, quieter than that. Like the soft tearing of fabric you thought was strong. I ended the call before I said something I couldn't take back. Then I stood there, in the middle of my kitchen, holding a phone that suddenly felt heavier than a brick. What if they were right? I'd always prided myself on being sharp, independent, the one who remembered birthdays, appointments, the color of the dress Clara wore to prom. But lately, I did forget things. Words slipped through cracks. I once walked into the garage and couldn't remember what I was looking for. Still, this? Alone? No, I would remember that. Wouldn't I? But doubt has a quiet voice, and it whispers when you're most tired. I walked to the hallway mirror and looked at myself. Wrinkles deeper than last year, eyes not quite as sure. I pressed my fingers against the glass. You're not losing your mind, I said aloud. You're being lied to. But the house didn't answer, just the clock ticking and the letter waiting. Later that day, I called Dr. Morgan, my geriatric specialist. I booked an appointment. I needed to hear it from someone with a clipboard and credentials, someone who didn't share my blood. Because if I wasn't crazy, then someone I loved had done something very cruel, and they were counting on me to be too tired, too trusting, or too broken to fight back. The waiting room smelled like peppermint and printer ink. I sat in the far corner, away from the window, flipping through a magazine I wasn't reading. The same sentence on the page stared at me for 10 minutes straight, while my thoughts played loops I couldn't silence. What if I was forgetting things? What if I did say yes and I just don't remember? What if this is how it starts? Dr. Morgan greeted me like she always did, brisk but kind, the kind of woman who knew how to calm a person without coddling them. I liked that about her. She didn't talk to me like I was already gone. She closed the door, pulled out her tablet, and smiled gently. So, Margaret, you said you were worried about your memory. I nodded. Something happened. My children say I agreed to something I know I didn't, and I started wondering, is it me? She didn't dismiss it. Didn't wave her hand and say, "Oh, you're fine," like others might. Instead, she asked questions, precise ones, memory tests, patterns, recollections of small details. She had me close my eyes and repeat phrases backward, spell words, remember numbers. She asked what year it was, who the president was, where I was born. I answered them all, calmly, confidently. At the end, she looked at me for a long time. Margaret, you're sharp. Your results are above average for your age. I see no sign of cognitive decline. None. I exhaled. My shoulders dropped. So I'm not imagining it. She shook her head. You're not. And if anyone's making you question yourself, you need to trust your instincts. That stayed with me. You need to trust your instincts. I drove home in silence. No radio, no distractions. Just that sentence, repeating in my mind like a hymn. Back home, I went straight to my filing cabinet. Decades of records, all still carefully organized. Tax returns, receipts, insurance forms, notes in the margins, my handwriting, my memory. If I could keep track of every utility bill since 1982, surely I would remember signing a $47,000 loan, wouldn't I? I stared at the copy of the loan statement again. It was cold and clinical. No personal details, just numbers, contracts, dates. But one thing nagged at me: the signature. It looked like mine, but not exactly. Too clean, too practiced, almost traced. I pulled out my old checkbook, the one I hardly used anymore, compared a recent signature to the one on the loan document. And then I saw it. The loop on the M in my real signature curved left, always left. The one on the contract curved right, like someone trying to remember how I wrote it, but getting it just a little wrong. I closed the folder, and I knew. Someone I loved had forged my name, and now they were trying to convince me I had signed it myself. I barely slept. After Dr. Morgan confirmed I was of sound mind, I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. Relief that I wasn't losing myself. Dread because it meant someone I trusted was lying and doing it well. The next morning, I pulled the old storage boxes out of the hall closet, the ones Clara always told me to just toss already, full of yellowed receipts, utility stubs, old birthday cards from Ronald, and notebooks where I'd written every check I'd ever signed. I sat on the living room floor, surrounded by stacks of paper and the silence of a house that once felt like home. Then I found it, an envelope marked Banking 2019-2021. Inside, my handwritten records, neat columns, dates, check numbers. I flipped through page after page until my finger froze on a note. Check number 5821. Voided, not signed. Daniel asked. Denied. It was my handwriting. I recognized the pen. I even remembered the moment. Daniel had come over last spring, sweaty from hauling boxes, said he was starting something new, wanted a little help just until things stabilized. He slid a check across the table. Just sign here, Mom. I'll fill out the rest later. But I hadn't signed it. I'd taken the check back, torn it in half, and said, "If you can't afford to fail, you can't afford to start." He hadn't liked that. He left angry and I had written the note in my ledger because I knew he'd try again. But life went on, and the memory faded into the background. Until now. I rummaged through the bottom of the folder and found the torn check taped back together. But something was wrong. It had my signature on it. Only I never signed it. The paper was faintly imprinted with someone else's writing underneath, like it had been traced over a guide. The ink was darker than mine. The slant was off, and there was a faint indentation below the line, as if someone had practiced the loop a little too hard. My mouth drew dry. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate, careful, calculated. The loan must have been filed using this forged check as a signature match. I sat there holding it, feeling something inside me collapse and reassemble all at once. My son had used me. He didn't just make a bad decision, he falsified my consent. And Clara, was she in on it too? I stood up, knees stiff, heart pounding, went to my desk, opened a new folder, labeled it Evidence. I wasn't ready to confront them yet, not without more. But I had a ledger now, and I was going to write every truth down before they tried to erase me again. Because if they wanted to treat me like I was losing my mind, they were going to learn something. I kept receipts. I remember the exact shirt he was wearing. It was blue with little white sailboats, slightly wrinkled from the back seat of his car. Daniel always had a way of showing up looking both rushed and rehearsed, like he'd planned to seem spontaneous. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I had just made lemon tea. He showed up without warning, said he was in the area and thought he'd drop in. He sat at the table with that charming half smile he'd perfected since high school, the one that used to milk me when he needed a note for skipping class. Only this time, it didn't land. Something in me was already tired. "Mom," he said, reaching across the table, "I have an opportunity." That word, opportunity. It sounded rehearsed, like it came from a podcast or a YouTube guru. It's a startup, an app that connects freelancers to clients. The tech is solid. We just need a little capital to get it off the ground. I took a sip of my tea and said nothing. "Look," he said, sliding a blank check toward me. "I'll fill it out. All I need is your signature. We'll pay it back in 6 months, tops." "Who's we?" I asked. "Me and some friends from college. They believe in me." I looked at the check, then at my son. Daniel was always chasing the next big thing. First, it was crypto, then drop shipping, then real estate. None of it stuck. Every time he asked for help, and every time I gave him something, a few $100s here, a place to stay, an old laptop. I never made him beg. I was his mother. But something had shifted in me that day. Maybe it was the way he didn't look me in the eye. Maybe it was the folder in his bag labeled Plan B. Or maybe I was just tired of being everyone's safety net. "No," I said. He blinked, confused, as if the word was foreign. "Mom, it's not a big deal." "It is to me." He leaned back in his chair. "You don't believe in me." I wanted to say I used to, that I believed in the little boy who built forts out of couch cushions and dreamed of being an astronaut. But this man in front of me, he was no dreamer. He was a manipulator wearing my son's face. "You'll regret this," he said, standing up, folding the check, and shoving it in his pocket. I followed him to the door. "Daniel, don't do anything stupid." He didn't answer, just drove off. That night, I wrote it down in my ledger. Check number 5821, voided, not signed. Daniel asked, denied. I thought that would be the end of it, but now I know it was just the beginning. And I had been right to say no. They just hadn't taken it as an answer. I hadn't been to the bank in person in years. Everything had gone digital. The bills, the statements, the transfers. But some things require eye contact, and I wanted to look someone in the eye when I said, "This isn't mine." The young woman at the front desk smiled like I was just another grandmother trying to reset her password. "Do you have an appointment, Mrs. Thorne?" "No, but I need to speak with a manager. It's about a loan taken out in my name." Her smile faded a little. She typed something on her computer, then motioned for me to sit. A few minutes later, a man in a gray suit with a beard too sharp for his gentle voice approached. "Mrs. Thorne, I'm Jeremy. Why don't you come with me?" His office smelled like printer paper and lemon wipes. He offered me water. I declined. "I received a notice about a personal loan," I said. $47,000. I never signed for it." He nodded, polite, professional. "Do you have any documents with you?" I handed him the loan notice, the copy of the statement, and a photocopy of the suspicious check. His eyes narrowed slightly as he read, "This account is active. Signed March 14th. I never came here that day." "Did anyone have your ID?" "My son had a copy once, years ago, but I never gave anyone permission." He typed for a moment. The keyboard clicks felt too loud in the silence. "He have a scanned copy of the loan application on file. Let me pull it up." He turned the monitor so I could see. My name filled every box, my address, my social security number, and at the bottom, a signature. Mine. Almost. He zoomed in, and I saw it clearly for the first time, something I hadn't noticed before. The ink had slight shakiness in the loop. Not hesitation. Hesitation would have been mine. This was mimicry. He looked from the screen to my face. "You're saying this isn't your signature." "I'm saying it's close, but it's not mine." He didn't argue, didn't shrug, just nodded slowly. Then something unexpected. He stood, walked over to a locked cabinet and pulled out a paper file. "This account was flagged internally a few weeks ago. One of our tellers thought the documentation looked odd, but nothing moved forward because there was no formal complaint." He set the file down and opened it. Inside, a printed copy of the check that had been used to confirm the signature match. It had faint lines beneath the ink, practice strokes, the exact same ones I'd noticed on the taped-together check from my drawer. The room felt smaller. Jeremy sat down again. "Mrs. Thorne, if this wasn't you, you may have grounds for a fraud investigation." My throat tightened. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't forgetful. I was being erased. And now, finally, someone else could see it too. I waited until Sunday. Daniel always came by on Sundays, mostly for food. He'd show up around noon, pretending it was to check in on me, but I knew the pattern. He wanted something hot on the table and his ego gently stroked. This time there was no roast, no pie cooling on the windowsill, just me and a folder sitting on the kitchen table. He came in whistling, called out, "Hey, Ma," like we were fine. "Sit down," I said. He froze in the doorway. The tone was unfamiliar, and I saw it ripple through him. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. He sat slowly. I opened the folder and laid it out like evidence in a courtroom. The forged check, the loan application, the printout from the bank. My note in my own handwriting. Check number 5821, denied. He stared, didn't reach for them, didn't blink. "Daniel," I said quietly, "did you do this?" He leaned back in the chair like it was all a misunderstanding. "You said you wanted to help me." I said no. I remember saying no. I wrote it down. "You must have forgotten." I slammed my hand on the table so hard the folder jumped. "Don't say that to me again." His mouth opened, closed. The lie hung on his lips, half formed. "Do you think I wouldn't notice?" I said. "Do you think because I'm old and quiet and alone, I'd just let this slide?" He stood now, agitated. "You're making a big deal out of nothing. It was for my business. I was gonna pay it back. You said—" "I never said yes." "You said you trusted me." "I did." That silenced him. I could see the wheels turning. He was trying to pivot, to charm his way back, but the truth was louder now. And then, from the hallway, came another voice. "Clara." "What's going on?" I hadn't expected her. She never came by without calling, but there she was, coat in hand, keys still swinging. Daniel looked at her like she was his lifeline. "Mom's accusing me of fraud." Clara looked at the table, at the papers, at me. "It wasn't just him," she said quietly. Time stopped. "What?" "He told me he'd pay it back before you ever noticed. I didn't think you'd be hurt. I thought it was for the family." For the family. The words tasted like vinegar. I looked at my children, my son who forged my name, my daughter who kept the secret, and I realized something awful. They didn't think they stole from me. They thought they were entitled to it. "You both looked me in the eye and told me I was confused. You made me question my own mind." "We didn't need you," Clara started. "Yes," I interrupted, voice low, shaking. "You did." The betrayal sat in the room like a fourth presence, heavy, cold. I stood up, folded the papers, and held them close. "I'm not done with this," I said. "Not by a long shot." And I left them in the kitchen where they belonged, together, exactly where the damage was born. I didn't cry. Not at first. I walked into my bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed like I used to when Ronald was alive, waiting for the sound of his shoes in the hallway. But he didn't come. Only silence did. Heavy, unblinking silence. I thought about everything I'd just heard. Clara had known, maybe not from the start, but she knew. She looked me in the eye, watched me second-guess myself, watched me shrink under the weight of her silence, and said nothing. Daniel had forged my name, lied to my face, repeatedly. They didn't just steal money, they stole my dignity, my certainty, my mind. That's what I couldn't forgive. Later that evening, Clara came back. She didn't knock, just walked in like nothing had shattered. "Can we talk?" I didn't respond. She sat on the couch across from me, hands clasped like a child waiting for punishment. "I didn't think it would get this far," she said. I turned toward her slowly. "How far did you think it would get?" She looked down. "Daniel said you agreed, that you forgot. He said we needed the loan to cover the app development. I believed him. And when I said I didn't remember, when I begged you to believe me," her voice broke, "I thought maybe you were lying or trying to protect yourself from a bad decision." That hurt more than anything. Not just the betrayal, but the lack of faith. She didn't believe in the woman who raised her. She believed in the man who forged her mother's name. "You've watched me your whole life. You've seen how I keep lists, files, journals. I've remembered everyone's birthday in this family for 40 years. But the moment he said I was confused, you believed him." Her eyes filled, but I didn't comfort her. This wasn't her grief to release, it was mine to hold. "You always said we were a strong family," she whispered. "That was a story I told you to make you feel safe. I told it so well you thought I'd never notice when you made me the villain." I stood and walked to the bookshelf, pulled out a small metal box, my lockbox, my real records, the ones I never shared. Inside were backups, originals, signed statements, proof of who I was before they tried to make me forget. "I'm opening a fraud case," I said calmly. "Jeremy at the bank is already assisting. I've contacted a lawyer. I don't want revenge. I want my name back." Clara stood up too fast. "You'd do that to your own children?" I looked her dead in the eyes. "You already did it to your mother." The tears came later, after she left. Not for the money, not even for the lie, but for the realization that love doesn't always come back when you need it to. Sometimes it walks out with your signature. The first thing I did was change the locks, not out of spite, out of necessity. I didn't feel safe in my own home, and that alone was reason enough. The second thing I did was meet with the lawyer. Her name was Natalie Chu, sharp, precise, and maybe 15 years younger than Clara. She didn't speak to me like I was a delicate flower. She used terms like forensic signature analysis and criminal intent and financial exploitation of the elderly. And when I told her I was still legally competent, her eyes lit up like she'd found gold in my clarity. "They assumed you'd never fight back," she said. "That's going to be our advantage." We filed a formal fraud report with the bank. Jeremy backed me up. The forged documents were enough to trigger a full internal investigation. By the end of the week, Daniel's account was frozen, and I was notified that I could dispute the loan officially. It would take time, they said, but I wasn't in a hurry. For once, I wasn't surviving. I was resisting. I also went to the courthouse and revoked Daniel's power of attorney. I had granted it years ago when I had surgery, just for a short period, and never rescinded it. That mistake would never happen again. Clara had never had access, but I updated all legal documents to make it explicit. They were no longer my emergency contacts. My name belonged to me again. After the papers were filed, I sat outside the courthouse on a cold wooden bench, sipping coffee from a paper cup and watching the wind sweep dry leaves across the parking lot. I thought about Ronald. What he would have said. He would have told me I was brave. But I didn't feel brave. I felt hollow, steady, like someone who had walked barefoot across broken glass and was only just now looking down at the blood. When I got home, the house felt different. Quiet, but not the silence of defeat. The silence of peace. I opened the hallway closet and took out the old photo albums I hadn't touched in years. My babies smiling at the beach. Ronald holding Clara in one arm, Daniel on his shoulders. Christmas trees, paper crowns, fireworks. They had been mine once, my pride, my whole purpose. But children grow, and sometimes they become strangers who know just enough about you to cause damage. Later that night, I wrote in my journal. They tried to use my age as a weapon. They mistook my stillness for weakness, but they forgot who raised them. They forgot what I survived to get here. I folded the entry and placed it in the same envelope as the forged check and the bank report, labeled it Truth 2023, and tucked it away in my safe beside my will, because no one was going to rewrite my story again, not without a fight.
It's strange, the things we keep. Receipts, empty envelopes, old grocery lists tucked into cookbooks we don't use anymore. Pieces of life that seem meaningless until they remind us who we were before everything changed. Tonight, I sat by the window as the first snow began to fall, soft flakes drifting onto the porch, settling into quiet corners. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, just like I used to when the kids were little and the world felt manageable. I pulled out a sheet of stationery I had saved for special letters, the kind I used to write Ronald on our anniversary, the kind I hadn't touched in years. And I began to write. Not to Daniel, not to Clara, to me. Dear Margaret, you were never losing your mind. They wanted you to believe that because it was easier than facing their own failure. You said no, and they refused to hear it. But you remembered. You protected yourself. You found the truth. You fought, quietly, fiercely, with dignity. I paused and looked around the room. The photos on the walls had changed. The family portrait was gone now. In its place, a framed quote Ronald once gave me after a hard year. You are not to be underestimated. They underestimated you, but you didn't. You trusted your memory, you trusted your gut, and in the end, that saved you. I folded the letter carefully, slid it into an envelope, and wrote the words, "Open only when you forget who you are," across the front. I placed it in the drawer beside my bed. It wasn't for legal proof. It wasn't for revenge. It was for me. Because the worst part of betrayal isn't the lie. It's the way it makes you doubt your own voice. A week later, I received confirmation from the bank. The loan had been declared fraudulent. My name was cleared, the debt erased. The process to pursue charges against Daniel was officially under review. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. Clara never called again. Daniel sent a short message, something about being misunderstood and needing time. I deleted it. I had already given him enough of mine. But something unexpected happened last week. A young woman from my church, Amelia, showed up at my door with groceries. She said she heard I was going through something and wanted to know I wasn't alone. She helped me fix the leaky faucet, then asked if I'd like company for tea sometime. I said yes, because healing doesn't always come from the people who hurt you. Sometimes it comes from kindness you never saw coming. Tonight, I am not a victim. I am a woman who remembers. And in a world that tried to make me forget, I wrote myself back into existence.
She thought she was just tired. They told her she was confused. But the truth? They forged her name and tried to erase her voice. This is the raw and powerful story of a mother who stood at the edge of silence and chose to speak. A story about betrayal, not by strangers, but by blood. About gaslighting, ageism, and the quiet power of remembering who you are when the world wants you to forget. If you've ever been made to question your own truth, this story is for you. Watch until the end, because the most important person you can believe is yourself. Subscribe for more emotionally powerful stories based on real struggles, quiet heroes, and voices that won't be silenced.